All right. Good afternoon, everyone in attendance. My name is Billy Doolittle. I'm the account executive over the Southeast here at Brightly Software. We're the Siemens Asset Management Company, and we're thrilled that you made it out today. Today, if you've seen the email and you saw the agenda, we're going to be walking through your assets, how to tell the story of what you own, the need that you have, and how to best visualize that data. I'm joined here with Chris. He's the solution consultant here. He's going to be walking us through his presentation. Chris, thankful you're here. Just a couple of housekeeping items. There will be question and answers here at the end. Feel free to type in your question at any time. It's located right on your screen. And then other than that, Chris, is there anything that you'd like to say before we got kicked off here?
I appreciate that. Billy, let's do a sound check to make sure you can hear me okay.
Yeah, hear you great.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. Everybody, my name is Chris DeGunis. I am one of the solution consultants here with Brightly. I've been doing this with the company over 9 years, going on 10 years now, actually. And to be quite honest, a solution consultant, right, sounds fancy, but what that really means is I talk to people like yourselves, our prospects, our clients, and see what they're doing today and how some of the different solutions that we offer align with the challenges that they're having. So a little bit about myself. I work extensively really with our government and education clients. Both of those markets are where I've spent the greater part of the past 10 years learning about and working with clients like yourself. On a more personal note, we are all real people, so I'd like to add a little context to the discussion here. I do live on an apple farm in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, so I do a whole lot of pruning, harvesting, spraying. Also do some amateur astronomy out here, really nice skies and not a lot of light. So if anybody has questions about apple cider or apples in general, feel free to hit me up. Love to discuss it more with you. As far as the presentation and discussion go today, I'll hop back for a second just to refresh you how to tell your asset investment story. This discussion is actually something that I've been doing over the past year, actually probably 18 months, with not only our user conference, but some national conferences that we attend and do presentations at throughout the country. So if anybody here is familiar with PWX, which is the APWA, the American Public Works Association's national conference, this is a discussion I led there. We had 100 plus people turn out for that, this exact same topic. Standing room only as far as the little amphitheater they gave us was concerned. Fast forward about a month, I did this same presentation at ICMA, right? The City Managers National Convention down in Austin, Texas. Same discussion, same topic. We had over 150 people turn out, standing room only again. I bring this up, right, not because, like, I'm not trying to tell you I'm an awesome presenter. It's because there's a trend within the market. Your peers, the people that are in the same positions you are, you're clearly turning out to these discussions for a reason. Now, those reasons could be vast, but in my role as a solution consultant, right, again, what that really means is by listening to you, having access to different customer accounts and demo accounts on our side, I get to really hear the challenges you're having. And I've put together some trends that I see come up on a regular basis. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, right? We're just trying to get the stage set before we dive into some of these storytelling opportunities around asset investment planning. But within these trend of challenges that I've put together, I really want to focus on the first one that we see there, that loss of tribal knowledge, right? We've all heard the silver tsunami, all these other terms that they're not new, right? They've been thrown around now, even quite honestly, since before COVID, but they really became popularized during COVID. But the loss of tribal knowledge is something we've been talking about here at Brightly for literally as long as we've been in business, over 23 years now. And I bring this up today as part of the asset investment story because the tribal knowledge that we're seeing walk out right now, a lot of the times it's our most veteran staff. It's the people who know our equipment or our machinery our linear infrastructure and assets, they know them inside out. They're the ones that we often turn to when we're trying to make those repair versus replacement decisions, when we're having discussions about growth and where investments need to be. Unfortunately, those are the ones that are leaving the building and we're seeing going into retirement. So with that in mind, part of the discussion today, right, is going to center around how to take some basic data points and tell a different story than what you may be used to telling. Because quite honestly, the makeup of our elected officials, our upper management, it's never been more diverse than it is now. And when I say diverse, I mean the backgrounds that they've come from. Right? When I started doing this job, a lot of times in the leadership roles or elected officials, we're talking to people who came up through public works, people who came up through planning, parks and rec, that sort of thing. That's no longer the case, right? We have more and more people coming in from the private sector and coming in from worlds that, like, they don't know your world. They don't live in it day to day. They never have. So we have our loss of tribal knowledge. We have this new makeup of our leadership roles. We need a better way to tell the story. And to illustrate that, this is a thought exercise that I do during the in-person presentations, but I think it reflects well here as well. So everybody take a look at our grid, basic grid, 5x5. What I would like everyone to do is pick 5 squares, right? Think about the 5 that you're going to choose. And we're doing this for a reason, right? This represents a group setting in which you're having to make decisions and you're having discussions about where investments are going to go. These are the ones that I selected here, right? These are the 5 that I selected. Now, by the way, I meant to mention this before. Keep the Q&A going. We by no means have to wait till the very end. We're trying to keep these groups relatively small compared to our in-person presentations, so that some conversation can get going and we can continue these discussions in future webcasts. So did anybody choose the same 5 I did? Feel free to let me know in the Q&A. Also, any questions you have, put them in there. I'm going to monitor it instead of waiting until the end. But in all of the presentations I've done and brought this graphic up, exactly 0% of people have picked the same ones I have. And this is a pretty simple exercise without a lot of agenda, bias, or predisposition behind the squares that we're going to select. The point here is that even in a 5x5 grid, there's over 3 million different options that we could choose when asked to choose 5 different squares. Group dysfunction is a real thing, right? The point and the goal that we want to take away from this today is that gut feeling no longer works. And you know what? The gut feeling that most of us were relying on, right, back here, they're actually walking out of the door. So sometimes we know even less about our equipment and assets than we thought we did. Right? So keep this in mind. Keep this in the back of your head the next time you're in one of those group settings and have to have these meetings. There's psychology behind this. So when we talk about asset investment planning, right, we're talking about beyond the 4-year capital plan that elected officials are all gung-ho about. And we get why, we know why, but there's no reason that you can't take a handful of data points and tell a more impactful story. And a story that really makes it obvious why we need to look and plan beyond just 4 to 5 years. So the core of our discussion here today is going to be broken into these 3 pillars. And we're going to spend some time looking at slides, but we're also going to dive into some of my accounts that I have. I'm going to try to stay away from demo accounts and show you actual client examples from our reporting dashboards. But all of it's going to come back to these 3 pillars that I have up on the screen. And these are the 3 pillars that we try to break asset investment planning into. Now, you'll hear asset management, you'll hear enterprise asset management, you'll hear strategic asset management, asset investment planning. Come back to these 3 pillars. As we're discussing these in the back of your mind, I'd also like you to start thinking about where you are in this journey. Which of these pillars have you accomplished, or which one are you working on? Because quite simply, the asset register that you see in the center here, there's a reason we put it in that central column. right? So when I say asset register, what does that actually mean? More simply put, the asset register is what do you own? Again, it's in the center for a reason. Everything we discuss moving forward is going to be tied back to what you own. If you don't know what you own, how could you possibly start tracking things related to it? How are you ever going to tell elected officials or upper management what the annual cost on a piece of equipment or infrastructure is if you don't know what you own in the first place? Right? There's no way to set up a reliable PM program, preventative maintenance, on something you don't know that you own. Right? So when you hear asset register, you'll hear all of these terms in different presentations and discussions, but it all boils down to knowing what you own. And depending on what division we're talking about, there's going to be different answers to this question. And different people are going to interact with their list of what they own in different ways, right? This kind of screenshot you see in the background, that's what I would call a traditional asset register. It's a list of mechanical equipment at a facility. Typically, that would live in a spreadsheet. If we're talking roads, if we're talking sewer, if we're talking stormwater, that may live in GIS. That's just as important to know what you own and are tracking in GIS as it is mechanical equipment in a building. Now, for a lot of people, I just actually alluded to it. When I ask what you own, how many people immediately flash to something like this? A spreadsheet, right? Look across the top column and the top column are there, and then the bottom one. This is one of the most common approaches that I see when it comes to capital planning. People pull out the old trusty spreadsheet, right? It's got a list of things here on the left. We've got our years across the top, and I can see what the cost is going to be to replace or to carry out a specific service year over year. Right? That's a good starting point. That's not the worst place to be in. At least you're tracking what you own. It's not a big reach. It's not a big hurdle to get from this, right, a spreadsheet, into something like you see here as a screenshot of an asset register. It still looks like a spreadsheet, but there's key differences here. Right now I can take action on the items that I have in my list. If I want to set up a PM program on that chiller, I'm one click away from doing it. I don't have to build extra sheets within the document. I don't have to start building out cells of data. So one of the first points here really to the discussion is figure out what you own, right? And different teams, again, are going to have different answers. So start exploring these different strategies for how to figure out what you own, and most importantly, get it into one centralized location. This is a Brightly presentation. I would love for it to be in the Brightly software, right? But there's other tools out there. Some of you may be using them. So think about these different strategies when it comes to taking a generic idea of what you own and getting it into a centralized system. The most obvious is the spreadsheet approach like we just looked at. Any legitimate software is going to be able to import your asset list into the system and create that asset register. Whatever data points you're tracking related to the assets need to be imported in. Now, there's some of you out there, and I work with people like this day in, day out, and they're some of the ones I see the most success out of because they're coming from the least. Your CMMS and asset management tool should have a mobile application associated to it. If the crew is out working in the field, you need a tool that's going to meet them where they're at, right? So within that tool, there should be a mobile option for building out your asset list. So if you're in the position where you may have, let's say, inherited an out-of-date list that may not have a lot of details, and that's where your first step is building out the registry and centralizing what you own, make sure and check if your CMMS or asset management tool has that mobile piece, because the teams in the field can help you build out that list right there on the spot by creating new asset registry items as they go. The third option there, right? I don't like to lead with this one. Life is all about resources, right? Time versus money. I've seen success with clients doing this themselves and building it from the ground up themselves plenty of times. but we also have partners. A lot of you already have engineering or infrastructure partners that you use on a regular basis. Most of them are more than happy to come build out an asset register and actually do assessments on your infrastructure. If we're talking facilities, look at a facility condition assessment. Get a list from a professional of what you own and what condition it's in. If we're talking roads, get a PCI, right? A pavement condition index assessment done. Ride comfort or ride quality assessment, road degradation surveys. If we're talking sewer, right? NASCO's there for you. They have their standardized rating system. The point being, if you can't capture it yourself, there are people that can do this for you, because it all goes back to what we were discussing. Whether you're capturing it or you're having boots on the ground come capture it for you, if you want to tell an effective story, you have to know what you own. So next up, we're going to move over to the left, the operations management and CMMS side of things. I know a lot of you are probably using a day-to-day CMMS tool already, but what we're going to do is change things up a bit, and we're going to focus on the story that you should be able to tell with a few effective data points. Now, as we're about to move on to that day-to-day side of things, again, I'll remind you, feel free to put questions in the Q&A. I'll keep monitoring that if any come in, whether it's related to the asset register and on-the-ground services, or whether it's related to the upcoming CMMS discussion. But before we get into some examples, I'm going to share something that I have learned over the years of doing this and working with clients that are in the same roles that you are. And it relates to PMs. I can't tell you, actually, it may be the most common thing that I hear when it comes to clients, right? Before you dig in and actually understand where somebody's at, I would say like 7 times out of 10 when I ask somebody what they're trying to improve, you know what they say? I want to be more proactive. We're too reactive here. Hopefully some of you chuckled, because it's uncanny how frequently that gets brought up. And really, as you start digging in, what that means is they're either doing no PMs at all, or they have a preventative maintenance program built out, but they don't actually do it. And this may sound familiar to you. Unfortunately, I can't see you, but do PMs get put on the back burner for your organization like they do most of the ones I talk to? Just a legitimate question. If you want to put it in the Q&A, great. But they seem, and again, this is off of almost 10 years of doing this, PMs seem to be the first thing that gets cut. They're the first things that get pushed off when an emergency pops up. And, we push them off a time or two. We do something else. Nothing bad happened, right? So they're the first things to get cut. And unfortunately, it's the worst thing in the long run that we could be doing. It's the worst approach to take. There's actually a term for this, guys. If anybody's familiar with normalization of deviance, again, I'd love to hear from you in the Q&A, because this is exactly what's occurring when we push off PMs. All right, I'll give you a second to read that. But essentially, distilled down, what this is saying is, well, we skipped it once and nothing really bad happened. So what are the odds that something bad is going to happen next time? There are some very extreme examples of normalization of deviance. In fact, the first popularized use case of normalization of deviance came from something called the Rogers Commission. If I say 1986 or Rogers Commission, there's probably a few of you who already know where we're going with this. The Challenger. Normalization of deviation. They knew about the O-rings and the temperature-related issues long before the problem with the Challenger actually occurred. They have documentation of it. But nothing bad had ever happened in testing under those circumstances, so they didn't think there was a way that exhaust would burn through the O-ring and essentially destroy the ship. Right? So we had the Rogers Commission. This popularized not only the concept of normalization of deviance, but human factors investigations as a whole. We learned a lot. NASA promised they would do better. We fast forward 17 years. Another accident occurs. We lose another shuttle. This time it's related to foam breaking off of the shuttle and hitting the wing, putting a hole in the wing, something no one ever thought could happen. You know why they thought it could never happen? Because from the very first shuttle launch, documented and on camera, foam was breaking off of the fuel tank of the shuttle. Foam would break off on every launch, and it never did anything catastrophic. So why would it? Normalization of deviance. Nothing was wrong until it was. Run to failure, right? These are two very extreme examples of normalization of deviance on purpose. But remember, the core concept here is you're putting something off because there's no immediate failure that's going to occur. There's no immediate pain to be recognized, so surely it can't be that bad. You know what this leads to in your operation? Run to fail approaches over and over and over again. This very linear type of approach. Right? When you think back to that spreadsheet we talked about, when you look across those columns on the bottom, the numbers, well, when you don't fund the projects 1 year, they don't disappear. They go into the backlog and they stack up, and you're not taking the correct preventative action in the first place. You're running units past their useful life, right? Soon we're inundated with this feeling, right? There's too much. The backlog's growing. We're going into the emergency fund more frequently than we should be. Right? So think about it again. All of this is tied back to the day-to-day CMMS side and the concept of why we need to avoid falling into the trap of normalization of deviance and ignoring our PM programs. So we're about to look at a few examples of trends and reports that can help tell the story of why you need an effective PM program. Because remember, you're not presenting to the audience you typically would be in the past. It's people from the private sector. It's people from other career paths. So you need to start finding a way to talk about a different style of report. ROI is a trend that we've been seeing pick up a lot of steam over the past few years. In leadership positions, elected officials, they love the return on investment discussion. What am I getting from my money? What's the impact of what we're spending? And on the screen, I'm pulling up the age-old example, right? Everyone here is familiar with this type of example. Heck, most adults are familiar with this type of example. Buy a car, do oil changes versus not doing oil changes. Now, the difference that I'm offering you here is the annual cost perspective. And instead of just showing the savings, because typically this discussion would be presented as $15,000 of savings over 10 years. What I'm showing you is a different way, but you need an extra data point. In order to show ROI like I am here, 197%, I need the annual cost. In this case, the annual cost is $50 over 10 years, right? That's our PM operating expense. Now, annual cost could be PM specific. It could include reactive maintenance, but the idea is you need to start somehow tracking annual cost on your assets. Again, a reliable CMMS is going to take something like labor hours and convert it to labor cost for you. That's your annual cost when you look at it from a reporting standpoint. When you start looking at data points like labor hours converted to labor cost, category of work, bring materials into the equation if your tool allows you to do so. I'm not asking you to track this data on every light bulb that's changed or every inlet that we evaluate or every storm sewer we clear. I'm asking you to do this level of analysis on the primary and critical assets. Because if you start doing so and looking at this from an annual cost perspective, it unlocks numerous reports that you can start running, or what I would consider pages of the story that you're trying to tell leadership. The caveat here, and I'll throw this out there for full transparency, you need to be looking at no less than 12 months of data to really take any stock or put any stock into these trends. But if you're doing so, being able to look at things like your PM trends, right? let's go back to the comment I made earlier about one of the most, or if not the most commented thing that I hear in webcasts. We want to be more proactive. We're too reactive. All right, step one, we know what we own. Now we need to figure out, do we have PMs set on our critical pieces of equipment? If we have PMs set, are we completing them? Right? How many people, and again, throw it in the chat or the Q&A if you know, but how many people here can actually look and see what the percentage of completed PMs they do annually on infrastructure or equipment are? Or take it a step further, can you put a value on the ratio of reactive work you do to PM work? Those are the types of stories we want to start capturing and being able to tell. Right? Change the conversation. Start speaking leadership's language, because all of this is leading to making better asset investment decisions. How are we going to get the most bang for our buck over time? Well, we can't even have that discussion unless we're starting to look at these metrics from an annual cost standpoint. So next up, I'm going to get out of this presentation for a second, and we're going to look at some dashboards. I'm going to grab a sip of water while we do so. Again, if anybody has any questions or thoughts, small group here with us today, so feel free to throw those in the Q&A and expand the discussion. I'm happy to touch on any questions or items anyone has. All right, so I'm going to share out our screen with us. Billy, I'm going to get you back in here, and are you able to confirm with me that you see my dashboard?
So I can see analytic dashboard demo.
Yeah, you can see my website with the dashboards on it.
No, I see the slide that says analytic dashboard demo.
1 second here. And this is why I brought you back. Make sure we're on the same page. All right. Tracy, are you able to see, Billy, Tracy, are you able to see the website I'm sharing? It's showing that I'm sharing it. So.
Yep, yeah. I see it in the media player. For the audience, awesome. If it's too small up in the top corner, you can switch that for the main slide area just by clicking on it.
Perfect.
Did it get bigger?
Yeah, they just need to click on it and select it as their main viewer. Yeah, you're off the races, buddy.
All righty, great. So everybody, we are, like I mentioned before, with this view here, this is one of the analytic dashboards that comes with our day-to-day CMMS and asset management tool. This is not a demo account. This is what I was referring to earlier. This is a real client dashboard. Remember, this is all tied back to our day-to-day. What is our return on investment for completing PM programs, and what is our annual cost on assets? So this client has been using the tool you could see here in the middle for numerous years. They're using this one tool for facilities, parks, roads, as well as utilities, all within the one account. So if we take the top one here, facilities, if I want to report out my annual cost on different equipment at my locations, I'm simply going to select facilities. I'm going to hit the 2022 annual report so we have a full year of data. And now this drop down allows me to decide, hey, what visuals do I want so I can tell this story effectively? So we're going to go into our asset list. What this community is doing is very straightforward. They have their critical equipment built into the tool, and they tie their PMs back to the pieces of equipment. As the PM work orders are generated and assigned out to the crew will track simply the labor that goes into each task. They're not getting fancy here. Again, tracking labor. This tool will convert labor hours to labor cost based off of the wage for the staff member that you have in the system. Very straightforward. So what they can do is look across their list of equipment that they own, and in 2022, this is the annual cost for these different pieces of equipment on the team. So if we were to select one, something like this generator at the sheriff's office, the view to the right shows us the work orders that were performed in 2022. So they did 12 PMs on this one generator last year, and in labor cost, it was just south of $10,000. Let's stop before we even dive in any further, right? Think about that. That is great information when we bring it back to the trends we just discussed. So our annual cost is about $10,000 for this one piece of equipment, and that consists of 12 PMs. Let's look at a different piece here, right? A chiller is very different than a generator. Now, I'm not going to tell you who this client is, but I can tell you that they're in a region of the country that went through some of those extreme heat waves this spring and summer. As a result, look at this. They did 108 PMs on this chiller in 2022. And over those summer months, it actually shows that they're doing about 2 PMs per day. Which that's perfectly fine if you have the staffing to do that. It may just be a quick check to make sure it's operational. It's not going to take any more than 20 minutes, maybe even less. But there's labor that goes into that. So if you're tracking it and you want to roll out a twice-a-day check, you need to be able to show leadership that it's going to cost you about $5,000 a chiller in labor alone to do that annually. How many chillers do you have across your communities? Right? So scale that out to all of the chillers that you're working on. Right? Again, it's getting back to our annual cost. And here we go. We're going to get a little more in depth. Since we're tracking, look, guys, this is only a handful of data points. We're tracking the status of the work order, open to closed. We're tying it back to the chiller, and the staff is telling us how long it took. 3 data points. And instead of telling somebody we did 108 work orders on a chiller, which I hate to tell you this, but I think a lot of you know, nobody in leadership cares that you did 108 work orders on a chiller. They don't know what that means. They don't live in that world. What they do care about is that it costs $5,000 a chiller annually just to keep the darn thing running. Change the discussion. Now, when I scroll down, we'll actually see the records tied to the individual asset. So this one chiller that we're looking at, you can actually see here, we created 108 work orders. We only completed 104 of them. The average days to complete those work orders, 39 days. So we're not exactly on top of things, if we're being honest with ourselves. It's taken us 39 days to do it. $5,000 is the total cost, roughly. You remember what I mentioned was the most commented thing I hear on a regular basis? We want to be more proactive. Well, if you want to be more proactive, then you should probably do more than 70% of your PMs on a piece of equipment. In fact, the goal next quarter or next year should be to bump this to 75% or 80%. Incremental gains. Don't overwhelm yourself. But what I'm showing you here is a way to not only define what you own, but now I can easily see if we have a PM program. And more importantly, are we actually accomplishing the PM program at an acceptable rate? And I know we have a wide audience. I went right into facilities. I could show you the exact same example for roads. Right? They're doing the same thing. Here's their roadways. I could see exactly how much they spent on this roadway last year and what that consisted of. 17 PMs in this case. They're doing the same thing here, guys. They're tying the work back to the road segment, right? And they're tying the labor back to it. So here we have the same results. How many work orders did we do? I mean, look at that. The cost difference, right? So these are just different ideas and how you can use this data instead of just reporting out a simple number. A count is what we call it, right? How many times did we do something? It's great you track it, but one more data point puts dollar signs on it. Changes the conversation. If we went back to our mechanical equipment discussion here, we can go back to our chiller that we're picking on. And I mentioned and I showed you a screenshot earlier of some dashboards related to trend analysis. We just looked at annual cost. We just looked at being more preventative than reactive by trying to track and increase the PM ratio. But if we want a holistic view on the trend or the health of an asset, you need an easy way to analyze and look at it. All right, so remember, we're looking at our chiller. This is classified within our system based off of all of the factors that we've just been looking at. It's classified as a low-risk asset because we're actually doing a good job managing this. We could see the number of work orders that we've performed. And then we scroll down, we'll actually give you a definition. Non-PM trend, PM, critical, recent work order cost. In this case, we're scaling favorably. Here's our work order trends over the past 12 months. So these are all different dashboard approaches you can take. And I'm not telling you that you need to start tracking everything in order to get this level of metric. Have the discussion, figure out what is our most critical equipment, what is our most, what infrastructure has the highest consequence of failure, and that's what I encourage you to focus on first in building out these PM programs. When I clear this out, instead of looking at this from a strictly facilities standpoint, we're now looking across the board. So we're looking at roads, parks, utilities, and facilities. Easy for me to figure out which assets it considers to be the riskiest, right? So if we were to hit on these two medium risk assets, we can start breaking it down and figuring out why these assets are considered medium risk. So in this case, you can see this is a filter. This is an air filter or air compressor tied to a filter for our stormwater operation. Medium risk asset. When we scroll down, here's why it's considered medium risk. Our PM trend, it's trending up, right? Non-PM work orders. We're seeing more emergency repairs than we have in the past. And look here, PM trend, unfavorable. It's taking longer, if at all, to complete our recent PMs. These two are tied directly together. This is where we need to focus now, right? So this is the difference between having data and being able to analyze data, to learn something from it and start incorporating it into your day-to-day plans. All right, so I'll pause for a second again, see if we have any new questions come in while I hop back into our presentation. Hey, Billy, are you back with me on the 3-pillar slide? Make sure everyone's good.
I sure am. Yeah, I see it.
Great. So we've discussed the asset register, right? How important it is to know what you own to make your decisions. We've discussed the left pillar, right? The day-to-day CMMS, PM program, and inspection side of the equation. When we go over to the right side, the life cycle modeling side of the equation, we're really focused on the same central pillar. What do we own? If we know what we own, if we know the PM trends, we know our annual cost, then life cycle modeling allows us to take a snapshot of where our assets are today, put them on the appropriate degradation profile, and then see how we can get the most bang for our buck based off of the dollars that we're going to spend. Or another way to put it is, what is the impact of the dollars I'm about to spend today? And to do this, when it comes back to that life cycle modeling side, it's really all about what we call that degradation profile. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a car that you drive in every day. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a pump, compressor, tractor. Everything ages, right? And that is the degradation. At what rate and pace does it degrade, and what remaining useful life does it have? So when it comes to most what I would call traditional capital plans, they really focus on this last point, the expenditure, the replacement cost. Or what we pointed out earlier is what we call that run to fail approach. Letting an asset degrade, pushing it past its useful life, hoping we can get away with it until it fails and we have to go into the emergency fund. Very common approach we see with our clients. And quite honestly, it's the most expensive approach that you can take, which is an interesting choice for a lot of people who have issues funding and budgeting. But here we are, right? What Capital Predictor, the lifecycle modeling tool that we offer, allows you to do is move beyond that simple run to fail type of approach. How can we look at our degradation profile, and instead of just focusing on the capital expense of replacement, what other treatment options do we have available? As this thing ages, are there different interventions that we can take? Interventions that will cost less than an outright replacement. And if I were to perform an intervention when an asset is in state D, will it bump it back up to B? Will it only bump it back up to C? How do I get the most bang for the buck when I'm going to be spending taxpayer money? So I need to be able to show not only what we're doing, but how does it impact the ultimate service level that we're bringing the community, right? That's another big discussion and common topic in the market right now is service level. Right? Service level does not have to be a complicated, complex discussion. Right? I intentionally left this slide blank for a reason, because this discussion can go a lot of ways, and a lot of people overcomplicate it when it comes to that actual service level. Pavement is a good example. You name an acronym and there's a pavement assessment to go along with it, quite frankly. The problem is people in leadership positions, the ones we mentioned earlier that do not live in your world every day, they don't know the difference between a PCI of 75 and a PCI of 85. I need a different way. I need a better way to explain to them why we want to spend the money on the projects that we're going to do and what they're getting. What is the community getting in return for it? So those degradation profiles are going to be key to any sort of long-term planning and discussions that you want to have. But before we can get into the profiles, I do want to point out things like condition and criticality. This is a great way to evolve your asset register. If you think the register is in good shape right now, like you know what you own, you have a good spreadsheet, or you have good GIS layers, the next step is making sure you have condition and criticality tied to them. Condition is just another way of saying where on this degradation profile is the asset today. Right? So if its condition score is halfway through its useful life, then when the modeling tool comes into play, it's going to put it at the appropriate place. Right? So the context here, we need to know the condition. We need to know how old it is. If we're talking infrastructure, we need to know what materials it's made of, right? So these are all things that can be taken into account with the correct tool at your disposal. So I'm going to go ahead and share out my screen again here with you. Let me get a sip of water. There's multiple examples we can look at, guys, by the way. If you're listening and you want to pull up the Q&A or the chat, throw out an asset class you would like to see an example of when it comes to the predictor tool. I'm going to load up a roads example if anybody doesn't object, but really, we could take this a lot of ways if anybody has a strong preference here. All right, so looks like roads is good. So with our roads example here, the first thing that I want to point out is that these numbers that you see are customizable. This community that we're about to look at the pavement model for, they're looking at how they would spend $3 million a year and what impact it would have on the service level. They're going to look at 5 million, 10 million, etc. So when we select our first model for $3 million a year, let's add some context. This first dot you see is the current state of their roads network. Here's the condition of their pavement across this county. If you see the bubble above the dot, it says state 1.19. Look over to the far right with me now. This is your service level. Don't overcomplicate it. 0 is brand new. 6 is end of life. For most use cases, you can throw those out. Look at 1 through 5 as an A through F grading scale, right? Very straightforward. Even elected officials can understand this.
Hey, Chris.
So yes,
you're actually not sharing the live demo this time. It fell back off. Try again.
Oh, 1 second. Let's see what happens.
I saw it when you first went in, and then it fell off the screen.
Yeah, I'll share it again. Tracy, are you with me?
Yep, and it looks great. Yep.
All right, perfect. So everyone, thank you for pointing that out, Tracy. So what I was pointing out within this chart, for $3 million a year, that's the blue bars we see. Annual cost, this is a 30-year model. You can see it across the bottom axis. Here's the current condition of the roadways of that state 1.19, meaning their roads are in good shape. Over here to the far right is that service level I was referring to. 0 being brand new, 6 end of life, 1 through 5 is our A through F scale. So when we return to the first point with context, that state 1.19 is really good. So one of the first things this chart allows them to do with their decision makers is say, hey, if the roads are in good shape today, shouldn't the goal be to keep the service level as close to this as possible? It's a pretty realistic goal. If it's good and we're getting minimal complaints, let's keep it as close to this score as possible. The trend line you see represents the service level of the roads over the next 30 years. So if we're trying to keep this in good shape based off of the initial score, I would say this strategy significantly fails the community. And you can see why when we look back to the blue bars. They're actually planning to have a funding gap here, this 3 to 5 year period. And the reason could be widely varying depending on the community, but in this case, they're looking at different grants. They're going to have a gap between grant funding, and they have to figure out if they want to invest their own money in the gap that they're going to have. Now, this chart shows them in no undiscerning terms, if you allow this funding gap to occur and don't invest in the pavement, the $3 million that you were spending initially per year will no longer be sufficient to cover the backlog that you're going to create for yourself during this funding gap. Hence why you see a drop off and it never recovers. So this backlog is an issue. And to fast forward, because I know we're getting towards the top of the hour here, if this is the strategy that they're going to do, allow this funding gap without investing themselves in it, they're actually going to need something closer to $10 million a year annually after the funding gap in order to get the roads back up into the service level that the community is used to. Right? Quite a jump in spending that they would have to do. And to be quite honest, it's kind of self-inflicted because of the lack of investment that they're putting forth. Now, each of these different scenarios has a wealth of reports. There's dozens of ways you can tell this story depending on who the audience is. One of the most impactful ways to show this is to focus on the backlog with elected officials. You really want to tell that story about how poor of a job they're doing investing in infrastructure? Show them the backlog. So remember, this is the underfunded model, $3 million a year over 30 years. They started off in good shape. In 30 years, instead of having almost no backlog, this is what the chart for backlog growth will look like year over year for this county. Starting point today, pretty much no backlog over here on the far left. Now look what happens. Here's the gap in funding that's going to be created, and look at the backlog that results from it. We can actually go out to year 30 of this model and show leadership that they're going to create $146 million of backlog for themselves. And these are the different types of projects that they're not funding. So this can be a real eye-opener when it comes to telling the story a different way. And if we have some folks here who are interested in really diving into the life cycle modeling and long-term planning discussion side of this, there are numerous reports we can dive into. There's GIS story maps that we can create from this data. So I would love the opportunity to spend some more time in a webcast setting discussing some individual use cases. We can really dive into figuring out what story needs to be told to upper management and electeds, and really figure out how we can customize this for you. But hopefully this has been some good insight into different ways that you can tell this asset story without focusing on the traditional spreadsheet and just counting the number of work orders that are going into things. So I'll stop my share and bring us back in here. Again, I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about what we discussed today, or if you'd like to set up a follow-up. Billy would be a great point of contact for you to reach out to, and I'll turn it back over to him to wrap us up here over the last few minutes.
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much. I thought that was very insightful, especially around the strategic asset management. I've been keeping an eye on the chat. I didn't see anything really come forward, and that's fine. I did have a question for you as we wrap here, Chris. When it comes to strategic asset management, when folks initially get started, how much data is required for getting more strategic with predictive modeling?
When it comes to the life cycle modeling side of things, I would say the key data points are going to be, one, knowing what you own, right? Back to that slide that I kept harping on that you're all probably tired of seeing. That's the point. Step one is knowing what you own, obviously. Step two is knowing the condition that it's in. Right now, within that concept of knowing what you own, to do accurate life cycle modeling, there are a few additional data points. How old is it, right? Age of infrastructure is huge. Same for equipment. What materials is it made of? And when I say materials, right, there's some guesswork. There's some educated guesswork that can be done by some of your engineering partners that I have seen done with GIS and knowing what is similar around it. So materials can be really big. And then also replacement cost, right? Because from replacement cost, what we're going to do is take a network measure. So if I'm looking at roads, I'm not looking at square footage of a road, right? I'm looking at lane mile cost. If I'm looking at sewer or collections, right? I'm looking at linear feet of line. I'm not looking at lane miles, right? If I'm looking at roofing, I am looking at square footage. So by knowing the replacement cost will generate a network measure tied to it. But long story short, know what you own, know the condition it's in, how old is it, materials, and if possible, replacement cost, so we can generate a reliable network measure. Does that help, Billy?
It's very helpful, Chris. Yeah, I really appreciate that. For those on the call, just wanted to thank you for coming out today. Any follow-up questions, feel free to contact either me or Chris. You have my email. Or Chris and I should say. If there's anything that we can do to assist you, the cities and the counties present, I had a couple of metropolitan planning organizations love to contact you and discuss potential opportunities, ways that we can help. But Chris, thank you again. And I'll give 4 minutes back to everybody's day and hope everyone has a good day. And for those in Kentucky, happy election day. It is election day in Kentucky. I saw a couple of Kentucky folks in here. So best of luck to you, and let us know how we can help.
Brightly.